Hi everyone, Gundam Fax here for a fifth and brand new episode of our special edition Lore of the Universal Century. Today we're going back to the early late UC in an attempt to answer a particular question, which is... Yep, in this video we are going to present everything we know so far about the events and tech used during the Cosmo Babylonia War, from the end of the F91 movie until the end of the war in UC 128. But let's start by the beginning. What is exactly the Cosmo Babylonia War? Fought between UC 123 and UC 128, the Cosmo Babylonia War was a full-scale conflict which opposed the Earth Federation forces and the Crossbone Vanguard. Officially started by the assault and the capture of Frontier 1, which was then renamed Babylon and used as a capital by the pirates, this conflict was a surprise for a lot of people, as the Earth had not suffered real war since the Third Neo-Zeon War for 27 years earlier. Of course, there had been small conflicts here and there, but the Mafia uprising of UC 123-5 had mainly been fought on Earth and had been quelled relatively easily. In the same vein, the war against Mars Zeon had not really affected civilians, as the front had been moved to Mars, and the few drops which had been made on Earth had been more or less contained by the anti-automobile task force. The brutality of the assault of the Crossbone Vanguards ultimately proved that all this year of peace had been flukes. Why? Well, because these years were the mustering bath to the creation of the Crossbone Vanguard. Nearly 3 decades of careful planning, in which the Crossbone Vanguard had prepared its offensive and used all the resources of its manufacturer, the Botch concern, to achieve its goals. Through its filial Botch & Co., a space debris cleaning company where Bandai notably worked part-time, they had recovered unexperimented Federation and Neo-Zeon tech alike, such as the Jagan, later turned into the Burnen type, or the Mobile Armor Alpha Zero, which later spawned their Abiru Doga. Meanwhile, Botch Aerodynamics developed their own military mobile suits under the cover of civilian use project, as seen with the famous Dessa type, which aided the development of the Donan series, and the company also trained hundreds of pilots in its vocational schools for the future war to come. Even worse, as said in the manga Twilight of Axis, the eldest of the Runa family, Einget's Runa, Matsu Runa brother, became a minister in the Federation, something which allowed the Crossbone Vanguard to infiltrate the Federation assembly itself. In the movie, Seabook Arno understood this infiltration after realizing that the new cluster of Site 4 were on-L type, so not innovative designs and easy to take control of, and that the Crossbone Vanguard had planned to take over the frontier side even before its construction. In the movie, the Crossbone started the war by spreading the frontier side, and easily subdued the Federation local garrison due to more advanced technologies and a surprise effect. The poor Federation soldiers put up a good fight, but they are quickly put in defensive position and the colonies fall one after another. The frontier fleet is destroyed soon after, and at the end of the movie, the reinforcements from the moon are wiped out by the mobile armors Rafflesia. By the end of the movie, the Vanguard has control over all Side 4, has driven away the Federation, and the primary ace, Zabine Sharu, is still alive. By that point, one could say that the pirates pretty much won the war, but as Victory Gundam showed us, the Federation ultimately secured a victory once again. And at the end of the movie, we can actually see hints of this. Sure, the Crossbone did well, but their executive leader, the immensely powerful Cyber New type Iron Mask, is dead, and the Rafflesia, one of their main super weapons, is destroyed. The prized weapon of the Federation, the F91 Gundam, escaped the area of Site 4, damaged but absolutely repairable. Even worse, the Federation has secured Seabook Arno, a powerful new type, and the heir to the Crossbone Vanguard throne, Burerona, has also defected to the Federation side. With this in mind, it's obvious that the war was just started, and we are now going to explain everything we know so far about the events following the movie, mainly based off the mobile suit variation of F91 and Victory Gundam. Let's see what Ceres refused to show us in animated formats. The first thing we know is that after F91, the Federation finally decided to reorganize its army in order to push back the Crossbone Vanguard. As in the movie, The Federation arsenal at the beginning of the Cosmo Babylonia War was inadequate to deal with the Runners' offensive. The most common model at that time was still the J-Gun normal type, which is not, against common belief, the J-Gun seen in sharp counterattack. It was modernized, for sure, but it was still 10 to 20 years old and was painfully outdated, especially because of its large size. The artillery variant, the J-Gun M-type, and the high mobility variant, the J-Gun R-type, were not much better, and that proved to be dead meat in comparison with the much concerned models. The Federation had miniaturized mobile suit too, but despite a better performance, there weren't enough to deal with the pirates. The J-Cannon was primarily meant to quell riots and couldn't really perform well as a support unit if all the other units were wrecked in a matter of seconds. The Heavy Gun, on the other hand, remained a threat if piloted well, but it was not on an equal footing and usually suffered from surprise effects. When the Federation official found out about that, they panicked as they realized that the J-Gun wouldn't be the unit who would fight the war for the Federation, and pressured the field engineers into giving them something else to use. Lacking time to produce something really innovative, these engineers just did what the Federation had always did so well: add more weapons and call it a day. In that case, they introduced the Heavy Gun full equipment type, which was basically a Heavy Gun with different weapons mounted, such as a quadruple missile cannon, multiple missile launchers, and a railgun. Supposedly, this model was meant to fix the main flaw of the Heavy Gun, which was its low firepower, but ended up introducing more flaws as well. Primo, all the additional equipment tremendously reduced the mobility of the Heavy Gun, which was a great handicap in the time of miniaturized mobile suit. Secondo, because they didn't improve the weak generator of the base Heavy Gun, the full equipment type struggled to power all its weapons and was usually forced to sortie with only half of its loadout, which kind of make it worthless. With these problems, the full equipment type made several sorties, with some being more successful than expected, but still, it never passed the prototype stage and the engineers quickly moved to other projects. The second few modifications they made concerned the J-Cannon and gave better results. After witnessing the efficiency of the Vazbro against beam shields, the Federation started mounting the same weapons on the J-Cannons as well, thus creating the J-Cannon Vazbro type. The idea was not new and had already been tested by Anaheim Electronics in the early stage of the Silhouette Formula project as proof of concept for the J-Cannon Magna, whose piercing beam cannons were in fact cheaper and streamlined Vazbros. The Federation followed this trend and started mounting mass production Vazbros on some of its J-Cannons, which improved their artillery capacities. For the detail, we know that these mass-produced Vazbros are weakened at the F91 versions, but are still powerful enough to pass through beam shields. The apparition of these J-Cannons didn't change the tide of the war, but it gave at least the Federation something to start the counter-offensive. Still, at that point, the Federation was in a crucial need of a new mass production model to fight on equal footing the models of the Crossbone Vanguard. While the top brass had realized that too late, the core engineers were aware that the mobile suit forces were outdated and were actually working on it since UC-119. That year, they had completed the design for a successor to the Heavy Gun, the James Gun, which corrected the problems of the generator output, could port beam shields, and was internally closer to the J-Gun normal type, so allowing for a smoother transition for the pilots. The pre-production version, the James Gun early type, was being produced, and at the start of the Cosmo Babylonia War, only 7 units had been ruled out because of production delays. Now, these James Guns could have been great assets to the Federation war efforts if it wasn't for politics. The assembly, which had been moved on the moon on Granda, feared that the pirates would not attack Earth directly, but them instead, and shaken out, and all the 7 units integrated to the Granada garrison was a never-saw combat of the war. The James Gun could have been this providential new model, but its manufacturer, Anaheim Electronics, had other plans. In UC-122, the incursion of the Crossbone Vanguard were already happening, and while the Federation didn't do anything about it, Anaheim had realized that a new conflict was about to erupt. With the production delays on the James Gun, and because they found its design to be more ground use orientated, something the Federation later took advantage of, Anaheim started working on sister units and presented the design for the prototype Javelin the same year. The prototype Javelin saw combat as part of the first suppression fleet, and was notably used by Brigadier General Tachibana to reconcile with his son who had joined the Vanguard. The contract for the Javelin was accepted, but 2 additions were made over the prototype on the behalf of the Federation engineers. The first one was the addition of a beam shield for each unit to increase the survivability rate. While the faction which had the most beam shield at that time was the enemy pirates, the beam shield had been initially developed by Shinri for the F90 Vasper type, and with the right budget, mass producing it became a piece of cake. The second addition was the Javelin Pack. The new backpack added 2 new inbuilt weapons in the form of the Javelin Launcher, which were a polished version of the Short Lancer, the signature weapon of the Crossbone Vanguard, which was used to destroy mobile suits without detonating their reactor, and thus could be used to fight inside colonies. In comparison with the Short Lancer, the Javelin Launcher wasn't as clean, as it would sometimes detonate the enemy reactor, but it had some advantages. The launcher were not handled, and the pack could be replaced by other packs, such as the cannon or the cannon 4 packs. The Javelin introduction proved to be devastating, as it was on par with the best models of the Crossbone Vanguard, and because the Federation pilots were often more experienced than their pirates' counterparts. Nonetheless, it was not this introduction that was the ultimate victory for the Federation, but other things I will discuss later in the video. The second thing we know is that the Crossbone Vanguard did not lag behind in terms of technological innovation. After all, they were the pioneers at that time, and there was no reason for that to stop. One of the models rolled out after the movie was the Burger Gyros powered weapon type. An anti-ship variant of the Burger Gyros, this new mobile suit was meant to be used on the conquest of the frontier side was finished by searching and destroying the remaining Federation battleships and taking care of any incoming surveillance satellite sent there to probe the area. This model is not that important, but it hides a small fact. As stated by the mobile suit variation F91, it actually reflects the battle doctrine of the Crossbone Vanguard. Early in the Universal Century, the Federation and Zeon had realized firsthand the outdated of their ships and their vulnerability to mobile suits, and had developed their whole battle tactics around subjugating first the enemy mobile suits and then take care of the battleship. The Cosmo Vanguard, however, did not so think this way. For them, the priority was to destroy first the mothership and thus cut the supply line to the mobile suit forces. This way, the scattered mobile suit would be incapable of impacting the ground scheme of things and would be easily picked up. Now, another important thing which happened after the movie. We know that the Crossbone Vanguard was somewhat able to get their hand on the biocomputer. In a precedent video, we already detailed the functionment of this system, which acts as a reverb cycle. It was a technology exclusive to Shinri, and yet the pirates were able to obtain it. With this technology at hand, they produced the Dagi Iris powered weapon types, also known as the Dagi Iris Custom. This variant of the Dagi Iris was not anymore a commander unit for reconnaissance team, but an airborne warning control system mobile suit, putting an emphasis on individual performance. This means that the Dagi Iris Custom was meant to carry reconnaissance mission on its own, and then itself coordinate the efforts of all the allied mobile suit instead of sending back the data to the mothership, thus transforming the small mobile suit into a miniaturized command center. In the case of the Dagi Iris Custom, the biocomputer isn't just used to enhance the battle awareness of the pilot. By feeding directly the information picked by the suit to the human operator, the biocomputer allows the pilot to understand them, as it feels them, and this enables him to build the strategy without forgetting any small detail which could prove crucial. However, the biocomputer is an energy-hungry system, and the Dagi Iris Custom has an even more flaw than its predecessor. The regular Dagi Iris already lacked generator output because of the Ewok equipment, and that's why it couldn't use a beam shield. In the custom version, this gap between energy needed and energy provided by the reactor was so high that the mobile suit couldn't use any more beam rifle. However, the Crossbone Vanguard fixed this thing by giving it a 120mm autocannon as a replacement weapon. After the movie, this suit was put to limited production, but the suit was actually already present during the events of the movie. In fact, the Federation fleet of the moon, seen at the end of the movie, was easily intercepted because the Dagi Iris Custom had actually trailed them since their departure from the moon and had coordinated the assault of the Rafflesia. The last suit we know appeared after the movie is the Vinagina 2, which Reborn 100 is widely known as a trashy kill. With its dual camera system, V-fin and fin nozzle similar to the F91 Vasbur, the V-Nagina 2 is the closest thing to a Gundam the Crossbone Vanguard ever had prior to the Crossbone Gundams. Now, it will be more difficult for me to speak straight facts because we enter a grey area I like to call the strange case of the V-Nagina 2. Basically, everything we know about these mobile suits are assumptions, and even the official mobile suit variation file has a lot of interrogation points in it. According to it, the V-Nagina 2 was probably initially meant for the Red Vanguard, which was a special force unit under Chef Sheffield which had used the Bergabalus and the Vigna Zero. However, the V-Nagina 2 was probably claimed by Dorel Rona as his new personal mobile suit, and the unit survived until UC-136, when it would be modified into the Jupiter equipment version and used by the Steel 7. The sum of the strange case of the V-Nagina 2 is that it was actually never meant to appear on screen. We could all have guessed that in the original planned 50 episode series, this suit would have served as a Scooby-Doo antagonist, or even as the final nemesis, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Now, Mobile Suit Variation F91, I quote, said it wasn't meant for animation purposes, so it could also be that at the time F91 was converted into a compilation movie, there weren't such plans yet, and it could be that had the script made it over 12 episodes, they would have included it. Now, I'm going to close this strange case and let Sunrise reconsider animating all these nice mobile suits. At some point during the war, the Crossbone Vanguard deployed their new space fortress, Illuyanka's Bastion, which was a Death Star lookalike. While the Federation's second suppression fleet managed to take it down in UC-123, thanks to the F91 second notably, it was the Federation's last active move before UC-125, something I'm going to explain very clearly in the following part. The first thing we know is how the war actually unfolded and the way the Earth Federation managed to finally secure its victory. You see, you could think that the Fedis won the war with raw strength, but they actually chose a more subtle approach. First of all, they quarantined all Side 4 and effectively cut the external supply line with the proven method of the blockade. With their new javelins, the Earth Federation Space Forces were able to keep the blockade unbreached and enabled the Earth Federation to engage the second phase of their plan. Like they had done in UC-68 against the initial Republic of Zion, the Federation used the barter policy, which forced the Public Colony Corporation to stop shipping resources to the colonies of the frontier side. This worked tremendously, and the Crossbone Vanguard organization started to crumble. In UC-125, the table turned for the Vanguard as Berarona, who was sympathetic to the Federation cause, returned and denounced the way of her grandfather Maestro Rona. This return caused a massive wave of defections, and soon, Berarona, piloting her newly acquired V-Nagina Berarona Special, was able to assemble an army of followers to challenge the original Vanguard. This meant that it was not anymore a war between the Crossbone Vanguard and the Earth Federation forces, but between a thinned-out Crossbone Vanguard against the Earth Federation forces and the forces loyal to Berarona. The Crossbone effectives were reducing, and the economy of Cosmo Babylonia was crumbling. The Federation finally gave the killing blow by applying economic sanctions on the Butch Council. Made with the complicity of Anaheim Electronics, these sanctions basically ruined the Butch Council and brought it very close to bankruptcy. While the Butch Council only collapsed in UC-133, it was not able to produce any more models for the Crossbone Vanguard, which lost their previously held technological advantage. At that point, the civil war and economic crisis were ruining the pirates, and in UC-128, Maestro Rona died, leaving the Crossbone Vanguard without leader and without heirs. Soon after, the Jupiter Energy Fleet withdrew their support as well, and the Federation was able to take back the frontier side in a matter of months, effectively putting an end to the bloody Cosmo Babylonia War. Now, time to discuss about all the things which might have happened during that period, but that we can unfortunately confirm at 100%. These are mostly speculations, but they are based on heavily hinted things and logical evidences, which makes sense with background lore. The first thing which probably happened is the death of Dorel Rona. See, during the movie, Bera had been chosen by Matsu as the primary heir, but by defection, she had lost her claim, even so a large part of the Crossbone Vanguard still viewed her as the legitimate heir. After F91, Iron Mask was dead and Naja Runa was unfitted to take the mantle. While there were some cadet branches of the Runa family, the main branches still had Dorel to be named heir, so he probably replaced his half-sister as Matsu heir. Now, see, Matsu died, I quote, heirless, which means that the most plausible heir after Bera had defected or was dead in UC 128. Since Dorel doesn't appear in Crossbone Gundam, we can only assume that he ended up killed in action during the war, thus depriving the Vanguard of another skilled pilot. Another thing which probably happened but is shrouded in mystery is about the possible defection of Zabine to the Bera faction. In Crossbone Gundam, he is part of the second Crossbone Vanguard and was even given the Crossbone Gundam X2, which could indicate that he joined her side in the middle of the Cosmo Babylonia War. This claim is supported by the attitude of Zabine in the movie, who doesn't seem to like how some of the top brass of the Vanguard just plan to unleash mass murdering machines without questions. However, Zabine could also have joined Bera after the collapse of the first Crossbone Vanguard, as he ended up betraying the second Crossbone Vanguard because he saw the ideology was terrible. Until now, we can't confirm lesser possibilities. Now, for the Federation side. The Cosmo Babylonia War was probably the war where Harrison Madden took his first marks and got his first kill. For those who don't know Madden, this guy is an absolute beast. On board of its blue mass production type F91, his ace known as the Blue Flash is one of the best Federation pilots of the late UC, and was notably the only man which forced Sibo Karno to draw the beam shield of the Crossbone X1. In Crossbone Gundam, he already held the ranks of captain, but in F91, was probably either a cadet or a lower-ranking pilot, and very likely for the war as well. On the same background is about the limited production of the F91 Gundam. In Crossbone Gundam, we are introduced to the mass production type F91, which is almost identical to the prototype, but discard the MIP effect and the new type-use aspects of the biocomputer. On the other end, the old type-use features of the biocomputer are enhanced, which make it a better fit for the average grunt. Now, we don't know when these units were rolled out, but it wouldn't really make sense for them to have been created after the Cosmo Babylonia War. First, because all the other units the Federation deployed in Crossbone were, for the more recent models, Cosmo Babylonia era mobile suits, so it wouldn't really make sense for the mass production F91 to be an exception. Second, while rolling out a limited production of Gundams during a war is one thing, doing the same during peacetime is, well, unwise if you aren't planning another war, which the Federation was surely not doing. So with that, we can conclude that the mass production F91 appeared during the war, but that's all the knowledge we have about it. Cherry on the cake to conclude this video, when confronted against the mass production models, Cyborg doesn't seem surprised that they mass produced the F91, so he possibly already knew, but is more affected by the fact that they are specifically sending them against him, the original pilot of the F91 Gundam. And we have now recented everything we know happened during the Cosmo Babylonia War post the F91 movie. This will be all for today's video, but stay tuned for future lore content delivered on the same channel. Hit the like button and most importantly, comment and subscribe as to really help the channel to flourish. So long fellow new types, until the time of our next special edition.